You are banned from Thanksgiving until you apologize to your sister. That was the last thing my mother said to me before hanging up. She thought she was wielding the ultimate punishment, cutting me off from the warmth of the family hearth. What she did not realize was that she had just severed her own lifeline. I looked at my phone, the screen turning black, and felt a strange cold calm wash over me. For 34 years, I had been the safety net, the bank vault, and the fixer. But if I am not welcome at the table, then my money is not welcome either. Before I tell you how I quietly disabled every single credit card, utility account, and insurance plan, my family relies on, hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been treated like an ATM by the very people who are supposed to protect you. My name is Sophia, and this is the story of how my family's greed finally cost them everything. It started 3 days ago on a Tuesday afternoon that should have been peaceful. I was in my home office reviewing risk assessment portfolios for a pharmaceutical merger when my phone buzzed. It was a FaceTime request from Kyle, my brother-in-law. Against my better judgment, I answered. Kyle's face filled the screen, flushed and frantic with the background of a high-end car dealership behind him. He did not even say hello. Sophia. I need you to authorize a DocuSign link I just sent to your email, he said, his voice loud enough to distort the audio. I frowned, minimizing the video window to check my inbox. There it was. A co-signing request for a lease on a Porsche Taycan. The monthly payment was over $2,000. Kyle, I said, keeping my voice steady. Why would I co-sign for a Porsche? You are currently unemployed and Jasmine has not worked since she tried to become a travel influencer 2 years ago. Kyle rolled his eyes, a gesture that always made my blood boil. See, this is your problem, Sophia. You have zero vision. I am not unemployed. I am pivoting to high-yield crypto consulting. I need this car to look the part. You cannot show up to meetings with potential investors in a 5-year-old Honda. It is about branding. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Branding does not pay the rent, Kyle. And speaking of rent, I pay yours. I am not signing for a luxury car when you still owe me $4,000 for the trip to Cabo you insisted was a business expense. Suddenly the camera angle shifted violently. My mother Evelyn snatched the phone from Kyle. Her face was tight with that familiar mixture of disappointment and aggression she saved exclusively for me. Sophia, stop being so difficult, she snapped. The woman was wearing a silk blouse I bought her for Mother's Day, standing in the kitchen of the house I paid the mortgage on. Kyle is trying to better himself for this family. He is trying to build a future for your sister. Why must you always be such a crab in a bucket, pulling everyone else down just because you are miserable? I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. Miserable. I am the only one in this family with a 7-figure net worth, a fully paid-off penthouse, and a credit score of 800. Yet in their narrative, I was the failure. Mom, this isn't about me being miserable. It is about math. Kyle has a credit score of 500. If he defaults, which he will, the bank comes after me. I am not doing it. Then came the voice I dreaded most. Jasmine, my younger sister, the golden child who could do no wrong. She squeezed into the frame next to Mom, looking perfect with her professionally done makeup, likely charged to my supplementary Amex card. Oh my God, Sophia, you are so jealous, it is pathetic, Jasmine sneered. You just cannot stand that Kyle and I have a passionate, exciting love life, while you sit alone in that cold apartment with your spreadsheets. You are 34 and single. Maybe if you were more supportive and less of a stingy witch, you would attract a man too. The insult was so childish, so predictable, yet it stung. Not because it was true, but because my mother nodded in agreement. She patted Jasmine's hand. Exactly, honey. Sophia, listen to me. I am tired of your toxicity. I am tired of you holding your little bit of money over our heads like a weapon. We are family. We help each other. If you do not sign that paper by the end of the day to help your brother-in-law, then do not bother coming to Thanksgiving. I froze. Thanksgiving was in 3 days. It was the only time of year I allowed myself to pretend we were a normal, loving family. I had already ordered the premium wines and gifts for everyone. "You are banning me from Thanksgiving?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Over a car loan." Mom looked straight into the camera, her eyes cold and hard. "I am banning you because of your attitude. Until you learn to respect Kyle as the man of this house and apologize to your sister for your jealousy, you are not welcome. We want a peaceful holiday with positive energy. Fix your heart, Sophia." Then she hung up. The screen went black. I sat there for a long time staring at my reflection in the dark glass of my iPad. The silence in my office was heavy. They wanted positive energy. They wanted me to respect the man of the house, the man who lived in my house, the man who ate food bought with my money, the man who drove cars insured under my name. A slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. They wanted to see what life looked like without my negative energy. Well, I was about to show them exactly what life looked like without my negative bank balance, too. I opened a new tab on my browser and typed in the URL for the power company. It was time to introduce my family to the dark. The silence in my office was not empty, it was heavy with truth. For the first time in years, the constant noise of their demands had stopped, and in that quiet, I finally heard my own thoughts clearly. I opened my laptop, and the blue light of the screen illuminated the dark room. My fingers hovered over the trackpad before clicking on a file I had updated religiously on the first of every month. It was a spreadsheet simply titled Family Maintenance, but as I looked at the rows and columns now, it looked more like a ransom note. Row 42, total monthly expenditures. The number stared back at me in bold red font, $28,450. That was the price of my admission into this family. That was the monthly fee I paid just to be tolerated. I scrolled up, letting the specific line items sink in. There was the $4,000 monthly charge for my mother's membership at the pristine country club she insisted was vital for her social standing, even though she never played golf. There was the $1,500 lease for Jasmine's downtown studio apartment, which she used solely as a closet and content creation space because the lighting in the main house wasn't aesthetic enough. And then there were the miscellaneous charges: Uber Eats orders at 2 in the morning, Sephora hauls, online gambling sites that Kyle tried to hide under vague transaction names like tech services. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, and the leather felt cool against my skin. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I saw my father. He was a man of few words but immense pride. On his deathbed 5 years ago, he had gripped my hand with a strength that surprised me. "Sophia," he had whispered, his breathing shallow. "Look after your mother. Look after your sister. You are the strong one. Promise me." I had promised him with tears streaming down my face. I had promised to protect them. For 5 years I thought protecting them meant funding their lifestyles. I thought keeping my promise meant ensuring they never felt the cold wind of reality. But as I opened my eyes and looked at that spreadsheet again, I realized I had not been protecting them. I had been crippling them. My father wanted them safe. He did not want them spoiled rotten while they treated his hardworking daughter like a servant. They wanted to ban me from Thanksgiving because I refused to buy a Porsche. They called me selfish because I asked for respect. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was not their family member. I was their employer. And they had just created a hostile work environment. It was time for layoffs. I opened the browser tab for American Express. My heart was beating a steady rhythmic thrum, not out of fear, but out of adrenaline. It was the same feeling I got before closing a massive deal. I navigated to the account management page. There were 3 authorized user cards listed under my primary platinum account. One for Evelyn, one for Jasmine, one for Kyle. I stared at Kyle's name. He had had the audacity to call me visionless while spending my money on bottle service. I clicked the small gear icon next to his name. A menu dropped down. I selected Remove Authorized User. A warning box popped up asking if I was sure. It warned that the user would no longer have access to credit and that their card would be declined immediately. I did not hesitate. I clicked confirm. The screen refreshed. Kyle was gone. I moved to Jasmine's name. I thought about her sneer about my single status. I thought about the thousands of dollars in clothing she ordered and returned damaged. I clicked remove. Confirm. Jasmine was gone. Then I paused at my mother's name. This was the hardest one. This was the woman who gave birth to me. But this was also the woman who just told me to fix my heart while breaking it. She had chosen her side. She had chosen the son-in-law who flattered her over the daughter who fed her. I clicked remove, confirm. It was done. But I was not finished. The anger was gone now, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. I opened a new tab for the electric company. The login was saved automatically because I was the one who set it up. I went to the billing section. The autopay was set to my primary checking account. I clicked cancel autopay. Then I went a step further. I navigated to the service status page. There was an option to suspend service for vacation or extended absence. I selected it. I set the suspension date for tomorrow morning at 8. Let them wake up to a cold house. Let them realize that heat costs money. Next was the internet provider. The gigabit extra speed package that Kyle claimed he needed for his crypto trading charts. I logged in. I downgraded the plan first to the absolute minimum basic tier, the one that could barely load an email. Then I went to the billing section and removed my card. I replaced it with the old expired debit card my mother had given me years ago for emergencies, which had $0 on it. When the system tried to bill that card tomorrow, it would fail. And when it failed, the internet would cut. No more streaming, no more gaming, no more Instagram uploads. I worked through the list methodically. The landscaping service that kept the lawn perfect, canceled. The pool maintenance crew that came twice a week, canceled. The premium cable package with all the sports channels, canceled. The cleaning lady who came 3 times a week because Jasmine refused to pick up her own laundry. I sent her a text directly. Maria, please do not go to the house this week. I am pausing services until further notice. I will Venmo you 2 week severance pay tonight. Thank you for your hard work. Maria replied instantly with a thank you heart emoji. At least someone appreciated my money. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a notification from my banking app. Fraud alert. Multiple transaction attempts declined. It had started. Kyle must be trying to buy dinner or gas. I swiped the notification away. I felt lighter, physically lighter. It was as if I had been carrying a backpack full of stones for 5 years and I had just dropped it off a cliff. The guilt I expected to feel was absent. Instead, there was only clarity. I was taking back my life. I was taking back my resources. I was taking back my dignity. I looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. The house would be dark soon. Real darkness, not just the night. I stood up and walked to the window of my penthouse looking out at the city lights. I had built this life. I had earned every single beam of light in this skyline. They thought they could banish me from their table. They did not understand that I owned the table, the chairs, and the food on the plates. I walked back to my desk to close my laptop. Just as I was about to shut the lid, one final notification popped up in the corner of the screen from the cellular provider. It was a simple gray box with white text, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The text read, "Account update successful. Suspension of services for 4 lines initiated. Effective immediately." I smiled. It was a genuine smile. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the bank. I was the CEO of my own existence, and I had just fired my worst clients. I closed the laptop with a satisfying snap and poured myself a glass of water. It tasted like freedom. 2 days before Thanksgiving, the sun rose over Atlanta with a crisp golden light. But for my family, the storm was just beginning. I was not there to see it happen, but I know exactly how it played out, because entitlement always follows the same script. My sister Jasmine started her morning at the shop's Buckhead, Atlanta, the most exclusive retail district in the city. She had an appointment at a high-end boutique to pick up a custom, altered emerald silk gown. It was the dress she planned to wear to Thanksgiving dinner, not to help cook, but to stage a photo shoot in my living room for her Instagram followers. Jasmine walked into the store with her chin held high, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors. She did not greet the sales associate who held the door open for her. Instead, she marched straight to the counter and tapped her manicured nails on the glass. "I am here for the Brooks order," she announced without removing her sunglasses. The sales associate, a young woman named Sarah, who had tolerated Jasmine's rudeness for years, forced a polite smile and brought out the garment bag. The dress was stunning, costing $3,000 a price Jasmine had never blinked at because she never paid the bill. "Wrap it up," Jasmine said, barely glancing at the finished work, "and add those diamond earrings in the display case to my total. I deserve a little treat for dealing with family drama this week." She pulled out the Platinum American Express card, the heavy metal card that made a satisfying clatter on the counter. It was the authorized user card linked to my account, the one I had severed the night before. Sarah swiped the card. The machine beeped a sharp dissonance. A message flashed on the screen. Jasmine sighed loudly, rolling her eyes. "Do not tell me your system is down again. Run it again and hurry up. I have a nail appointment in 20 minutes. Sarah apologized nervously and inserted the chip this time. The processing circle spun for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Then the same harsh beep. "Transaction declined. Please contact issuer." Jasmine laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "That is impossible. That is a black card. It does not have a limit. You are obviously doing something wrong." "Let me do it." She reached over, snatched the card from Sarah's hand, and swiped it herself aggressively. The machine beeped again. Declined. The air in the boutique grew thick with silence. Other customers, wealthy women who ran in the same social circles as my mother, turned to look. "There must be a mistake," Jasmine hissed, her face beginning to flush. "Call the merchant services. My sister probably forgot to pay the bill or something. She is so scatterbrained lately." Sarah looked at the screen again, her face turning pale. "Ms. Brooks, the system is giving me a code 05. It says do not honor. And it says, pick up card." "What does that mean?" Jasmine demanded. "It means I am supposed to keep the card," Sarah whispered, terrified. "It has been flagged as invalid. I cannot give it back to you." Jasmine erupted. She slammed her hand on the counter. "You will give me back my card right now. Do you know who my family is? This is theft. I am calling the police." The manager stepped out from the back office, a stern woman who had no patience for scenes. "Ms. Brooks, if the card issuer says to confiscate the card, we must follow protocol or we lose our merchant license. Please leave the store before we have to call security." Jasmine stood there, trembling with rage and humiliation. She looked at the dress, then at the earrings, and finally at the judgmental faces of the other shoppers. She had no other way to pay. Her personal debit card had been overdrawn for months. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, the bell on the door jingling cheerfully behind her, marking the first time in her life she had left a store empty-handed. 5 miles away at a premium liquor store downtown, Kyle was about to have his own rude awakening. He was standing in the reserved section holding a bottle of Louis XIII cognac. It was a $4,000 bottle. He was on the phone talking loudly to one of his crypto buddies. "Yeah, man, just picking up some light refreshments for the holiday. You know how I do it. Top shelf only. My mother-in-law loves this stuff." He walked to the register, placing the crystal decanter down with a thud. He winked at the cashier, an older man who looked unimpressed. "Put it on the plastic," Kyle said, tossing his card onto the counter. It was the same account type as Jasmine's. The cashier ran the card. Silence. Then he looked up at Kyle over his spectacles. "It is declined, sir." Kyle let out a scoff of disbelief. "Try it again. It is probably just a fraud alert because I am making big moves today. I just bought a Porsche yesterday." He was lying, of course. The Porsche deal had fallen through the moment I refused to sign. The cashier tried again. "Sir, it says refer to issuer. Do you have another form of payment?" Kyle patted his pockets. He had $20 in cash and a personal credit card with a $500 limit that was already maxed out on online gambling. No, just run it again. There is plenty of money on there. My wife's sister is Sophia Brooks. She covers everything. Call her if you want. The cashier shook his head. I do not need to call anyone. The terminal says the account is closed. He picked up the card and reached for a pair of scissors under the counter. Hey! What are you doing? Kyle shouted, lunging forward. But he was too late. Snip! The heavy plastic cut in half. The chip fell onto the counter. That is my property! Kyle yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Actually, sir, the property belongs to the bank, the cashier said calmly, dropping the pieces into a lockbox. And since you are unable to pay, I will have to ask you to step aside. There are paying customers behind you. Kyle looked around. A line had formed. People were staring. A security guard near the door took a step forward, his hand resting on his belt. Kyle's bravado evaporated instantly. He muttered a curse word, grabbed his phone, and hurried out of the store, leaving the $4,000 cognac on the counter. 10 minutes later, my phone began to vibrate. I was sitting in the private lounge at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, sipping a glass of chilled, sparkling water. I looked at the screen. Jasmine, then Kyle, then Jasmine again. Then a text message from Kyle in all caps. The cards are not working. Call the bank ASAP. We are stuck. I watched the notifications roll in like waves crashing against a rock. They were panicking. They were confused. For the first time, the magic plastic rectangles in their pockets were just useless pieces of plastic. They were realizing that their power, their status, and their dignity were all rented, and the lease had just expired. I did not decline the calls. I simply let them ring until they went to voicemail. I opened my settings and selected the option to block caller for both of them. Then I did the same for my mother. I could imagine the scene at the house. Jasmine crying about her dress, Kyle raging about the disrespect, and my mother trying to soothe them, assuring them that I would fix it, that I always fixed it. But not this time. The flight attendant approached me, her voice soft and professional. Ms. Brooks, we are ready to board you now. First class is completely open. Can I take your coat? I smiled, handing her my trench coat. Thank you. I am ready to go. As I walked down the jet bridge leaving Atlanta behind, I felt a vibration in my pocket one last time. I pulled it out. It was a voicemail notification from my mother. I did not listen to it. I switched my phone to airplane mode. The signal bars disappeared, replaced by a small icon of a plane. The connection was severed. Up in Aspen, the snow was falling clean and white and silent. Down in Atlanta, the fire I had lit was just starting to burn, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who would have to put it out. Thanksgiving morning in the Brooks household was usually a symphony of orchestrated perfection. For the past decade, that perfection had been purchased by me, Sophia. I would hire a team of top-tier caterers who arrived at 6 in the morning to prep the heritage turkey and the truffle-infused mashed potatoes. I would ensure the florist delivered fresh centerpieces of autumn hydrangeas and roses. My mother, Evelyn, would simply descend the stairs in her silk robe at 10, holding a mimosa, and take credit for the ambiance. But this year the house was silent, cold, and smelling faintly of stale garbage because the housekeeper, Maria, had not been there in 4 days. At 9 in the morning, the silence was shattered by the shrill ring of the landline. Evelyn picked it up in the kitchen, expecting it to be the concierge service, confirming the delivery time. Instead, her face went from relaxed entitlement to sheer panic in under 10 seconds. I am sorry. What do you mean canceled? She shrieked into the receiver. The voice on the other end was loud enough for Jasmine, who was filing her nails at the counter, to hear. Madame, the card on file was declined. We attempted to run it 3 times. Per our contract, full payment is required 48 hours prior to delivery. Since we could not reach you or your daughter, we canceled the order to prioritize paying clients. Good day. The line went dead. Evelyn stared at the phone as if it had just bitten her. She turned to Kyle, who was sitting at the breakfast nook eating a bowl of dry cereal because there was no milk in the fridge. "Kyle, fix this," she demanded, her voice trembling. "Call them back. Use your crypto money. Use whatever. We have 20 people coming in 4 hours, and we have no food." Kyle looked up, milk dripping from his chin. "I cannot call them, Evelyn. My cards are frozen. Sophia must have flagged them as stolen. It is a glitch. I will sort it out on Monday." "Monday?" Evelyn screamed, slamming her hand on the marble island. "Thanksgiving is today, you idiot. We cannot serve air to the extended family. You need to go to the store. Now." The look of horror on Kyle's face was almost comical. He had not stepped foot in a grocery store in 5 years. He was a man who believed ordering Uber Eats was manual labor. But the look in my mother's eyes was murderous, so he grabbed his keys. Without the Porsche, which was never leased, he had to take my father's old pickup truck that had been sitting in the driveway, the only vehicle they actually owned. While Kyle was gone, the reality of the house began to set in. Without the heating running, the large open-concept living room was freezing. Jasmine was wrapped in a cashmere blanket, scrolling through her phone, complaining that the Wi-Fi was down. "Mom, I cannot even post a throwback photo," she whined. "This is literally abuse. Sophia is insane." Evelyn ignored her, frantically trying to clean the kitchen, but she did not know how. She sprayed window cleaner on the granite countertops and used a dirty dish towel to wipe it, leaving greasy streaks everywhere. The sink was piled high with dishes from the last 3 days because no one had thought to load the dishwasher. The garbage disposal was clogged with lemon peels Jasmine had shoved down there yesterday, and a foul smell was beginning to permeate the room. An hour later, the back door slammed open. Kyle returned looking disheveled and winded. He was carrying a plastic bag from Walmart. "I got it," he announced, dropping a heavy, rock-hard object onto the counter. It was a frozen turkey, a generic brand 12-pound block of ice. Evelyn stared at it. "It is frozen, Kyle." "Yeah, that is all they had left," Kyle said, defensively, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It was a war zone out there. People were fighting over cranberry sauce. This was the last bird in the bin. Just cook it." "How do we cook a frozen turkey in 3 hours?" Jasmine asked, looking at the bird with disgust. "You just turn the oven up higher," Kyle said, with the unearned confidence of a man who had never cooked anything more complex than toast. "It is basic physics. Heat melts ice. Crank it to 500 degrees. It will be fine." Against all culinary logic and safety standards, Evelyn agreed. They shoved the frozen bird, still partially wrapped in plastic, because they missed a piece into the roasting pan, and slid it into the oven. Kyle turned the dial to the maximum setting. "There. Problem solved. Now I need to relax. The game is starting." Kyle walked into the living room and flopped onto the Italian leather sofa. He grabbed the remote and pressed the power button. The massive 80-inch screen flickered to life. He pressed the button for ESPN. A blue screen appeared. "No signal. Please contact your cable provider." He pressed it again and again. Nothing. He tried the local channels. Static. Sophia had not just cut the premium package, she had canceled the service entirely. The digital antenna that came with the TV had never been installed because I had always paid for the best fiber optic cable. "No, no, no," Kyle yelled, throwing the remote across the room. It bounced off the wall and cracked. "I need to watch the Cowboys game. I have $500 riding on this game with a bookie. You gambled money you do not have." Jasmine screamed from the kitchen. "It is an investment, Jasmine. You would not understand," Kyle roared back. The chaos was just beginning. In the kitchen, the oven began to emit a low, ominous hum. The plastic that they had failed to remove from the turkey was melting onto the heating element. Inside the bird, the ice was turning to steam, creating a pressure bomb, while the skin was incinerating under the 500-degree heat. First came the smell. It was not the savory aroma of roasting poultry. It was the acrid chemical stench of burning plastic and scorched meat. Evelyn looked up from the sink, where she was trying to scrub a pot with a sponge that had not been changed in months. "Do you smell that?" she asked. Before anyone could answer, the smoke detector on the ceiling let out a piercing shriek. Beep, beep, beep. Smoke began to billow out of the sides of the oven door. Black, thick, oily smoke. "Oh my God, the turkey!" Jasmine shrieked, jumping back as if the oven were attacking her. Kyle ran in from the living room. "Open the door!" he yelled. "No, do not open it!" Evelyn screamed, but it was too late. Kyle yanked the oven door open. A cloud of black smoke punched him in the face, filling the kitchen instantly. The turkey was a charred black lump on the outside, while likely still a block of ice on the inside. The plastic wrapper had dripped down and caught fire at the bottom of the oven. Small orange flames licked the bottom of the pan. "Get the extinguisher," Kyle coughed, waving his arms uselessly. "We do not have one," Evelyn cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Sophia always handled safety checks. They resorted to beating the flames out with a wet towel, creating a slurry of ash and water on the bottom of the expensive oven. By the time the fire was out, the kitchen was ruined. The white cabinets were coated in a film of soot. The air was unbreathable. The turkey looked like a meteorite. And then the doorbell rang. The chime echoed through the smoke-filled house like a death knell. It was barely noon. The guests were early. Evelyn froze, holding the blackened towel. She looked at Kyle, whose face was smeared with soot. She looked at Jasmine, whose hair smelled like a tire fire. And she looked at the house, cold, dark, smelly, and devoid of food. "I will get it," Jasmine whispered, looking terrified. She walked to the front door and opened it. Standing there were Auntie May and Uncle Marcus, the most judgmental elders of the family, dressed in their Sunday best, holding a bottle of cheap wine and expecting a feast. "Happy Thanksgiving." Auntie May beamed, stepping inside. Then she stopped. She sniffed the air. She looked at Jasmine's disheveled appearance. She looked past her into the dark, smoky living room, where Kyle was frantically trying to hide the burnt towel. "Good Lord," Auntie May said, clutching her pearls. "What happened here? Did you all get robbed?" Evelyn stepped out from the kitchen, trying to muster her usual haughty dignity, but it was impossible. Her face was smudged, her silk robe was stained with grease, and behind her the charred carcass of the turkey sat on the counter as silent evidence of their failure. "There has been a slight technical difficulty," Evelyn said, her voice cracking. Uncle Marcus looked around, noting the blank TV screen and the cold temperature. "Where is Sophia?" he asked. "Usually this place smells like heaven and is warm as toast." "Where is Sophia?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusing. For the first time, they could not blame me for being there and ruining the mood. They had to face the fact that the ruin was entirely their own. And I was thousands of miles away, likely ordering room service. 2,000 miles away from the smoke-filled kitchen in Atlanta, the only heat I felt was the smooth warmth of volcanic basalt stones gliding down my spine. I was lying face down on a plush velvet massage table at the St. Regis in Aspen, and the room smelled of eucalyptus and white tea. The silence was absolute. There were no screaming relatives, no demands for money, no guilt trips about family obligation, just the soft hum of ambient music and the skilled hands of a therapist named Lena who cost $300 an hour. For the first time in a decade, I closed my eyes and did not see a to-do list. My mind usually raced with anxiety about whether Jasmine had paid her parking tickets or if Mom had remembered to take her blood pressure medication. But today, my mind was a blank white canvas as pristine as the snow falling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. I took a deep breath, inhaling the expensive scented air, and let it out slowly. This was not just a vacation. It was an exorcism. I was purging the toxicity from my system, one luxury treatment at a time. Meanwhile, back in the house that I owned, but was not welcome in the atmosphere, was thick with a very different kind of heat. The smoke from the burnt turkey had finally cleared, but the smell of charred meat clung to the curtains and the guests' clothes. My mother Evelyn sat at the head of the dining table, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. She had changed out of her stained robe into a dress that was slightly too tight, trying to project the image of the matriarch she desperately wanted to be. The table was set with the fine china I had bought for her 60th birthday, but the food on the plates was a tragic assortment of disasters. The turkey was dry as sawdust and tasted faintly of the melted plastic wrapper. The mashed potatoes were lumpy because Kyle had tried to mash them with a fork after the electric mixer failed to turn on due to a tripped breaker he did not know how to fix. The green bean casserole was cold because they had been afraid to turn the oven back on. Uncle Marcus chewed a piece of turkey with grim determination, his jaw working hard against the tough meat. The sound of silverware scraping against porcelain was the only noise in the room. Usually my Thanksgiving dinners were filled with laughter and jazz music and the clinking of crystal glasses. Today it sounded like a funeral reception for someone nobody liked. Jasmine sat pushing food around her plate, her eyes red from crying over her ruined dress and her inability to post anything online. She looked up at the guests every few minutes, paranoid that they were judging her. And they were. Back in Aspen, I had moved from the spa to the private lounge. I was wrapped in a cashmere robe that felt like a hug from a cloud. I sat by the roaring fireplace looking out at the mountains. A waiter approached silently and placed a glass of red wine on the side table. It was a 1996 Chateau Margaux. $500 a glass. I picked it up, swirling the dark ruby liquid. In the past, I would have calculated what $500 could buy for my family. That was 2 weeks of groceries for them. That was a quarter of Kyle's gambling debt. That was a new pair of shoes for Jasmine. But as I took a sip, letting the complex notes of currant and oak wash over my palate, I realized something profound. That money was never theirs. It was mine. Every dollar represented an hour of my life. I had traded stress I had endured and risks I had managed. I had spent 10 years setting myself on fire to keep them warm, and they had complained that the flames were not bright enough. I watched the fire crackle in the hearth and smiled. The wine tasted better than any gratitude they had ever given me. Next to me, a man in a tailored sweater looked up from his tablet. He was reading the same financial risk report I had reviewed last week. We struck up a conversation. His name was Julian, a venture capitalist from New York. We talked about market volatility and the impact of the housing crisis. There was no asking for favors, no manipulation, just two equals discussing the world with intelligence and respect. It was intoxicating. I realized I had been starving for this kind of connection, starving for people who saw me as Sophia, the brilliant strategist, not Sophia, the walking ATM. In Atlanta, the tension at the dinner table was reaching a breaking point. The silence had stretched too long, and the guests were getting restless. Auntie May, who never missed an opportunity to stir the pot, cleared her throat loudly. She looked at the pathetic slice of burnt turkey on her plate, and then up at Evelyn. "You know, Evelyn, this is certainly a different vibe than last year," Auntie May said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Usually Sophia has those wonderful caterers, and the wine is usually French, not this supermarket blend." Evelyn stiffened her grip, tightening on her fork. "Well, we decided to have a more intimate homemade celebration this year," she lied smoothly. "We wanted to get back to basics. Family cooking for family. It is more authentic." "Authentic," Auntie May repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what we are calling it?" "Because I saw Kyle at the liquor store earlier today, and my friend who works there said his card got cut in half." The room went deadly silent. Kyle dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against his plate. Jasmine froze. Evelyn turned a shade of purple that clashed horribly with her dress. And come to think of it, Auntie May continued enjoying the chaos she was unleashing. "I ran into Cousin Beatrice in the driveway. She said she tried to call Sophia to wish her a happy Thanksgiving, but the call went straight to voicemail. And then she said she heard a rumor." Evelyn stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "People hear rumors all the time, May. It does not mean anything." "Sit down, Evelyn," Auntie May said sharply. "I am asking a question. Is it true that Sophia finally cut you off? Is that why we are eating charcoal turkey in a freezing cold house? Because rumor has it she suspended all the accounts. The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Every guest at the table stopped chewing and looked at Evelyn. The shame was palpable. It was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. For years she had bragged about her wealthy daughter taking credit for my success while treating me like dirt. Now the facade was cracking. She opened her mouth to speak to lie, to spin another story, but nothing came out. I took another sip of my $500 wine in Aspen watching the snow fall. I did not know exactly what was happening in Atlanta at that moment, but I felt a sudden surge of satisfaction, a deep, intuitive knowing that the balance of the universe was shifting. I raised my glass to the empty room. "Happy Thanksgiving, family," I whispered. "Enjoy the reality check. It is the only gift I got you this year." The last guest had barely pulled their car out of the driveway before my mother began her counterattack. In the cold, smoke-smelling living room, Evelyn did not pick up a broom to clean the mess or a phone to apologize to me. Instead, she picked up her iPad. She sat on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket like a tragic heroine from a Victorian novel, and logged into Facebook. She was about to do what narcissists do best, which is to rewrite history while the ink is still wet. I was not there to see her type the words, but I did not need to be. I knew her playbook by heart. She would not mention the declined credit cards or the demand for a Porsche. She would not mention the years of financial abuse. She would frame the narrative around abandonment. She selected a photo from 2 years ago, one where she looked frail and weary, a stark contrast to the healthy, well-fed woman she actually was. Then she began to write. An hour later, my phone in Aspen began to light up. I had unblocked the notifications but kept the calls silenced, curious to see how long it would take for the fallout to reach me. It started with a single vibration, then another, until the phone was buzzing continuously, like an angry hornet on the mahogany table. I picked it up and opened the Facebook app. There it was. A post that was already garnering hundreds of likes and sad face reactions from the church community and our extended family. The post read like a eulogy for a living daughter. It began with the words, "My heart is heavy tonight." Evelyn wrote about how she had sat in a freezing house on Thanksgiving, abandoned by the child she had sacrificed everything to raise. She described how she and Jasmine, my pregnant sister, had been forced to eat burnt food because they had been cut off without warning. She used phrases like elder abuse and heartless cruelty. She claimed that I had vanished to a luxury resort while leaving them to starve, painting me as a selfish monster who cared more about spa treatments than the health of her own mother. She carefully omitted the fact that she lived in a $1 million home I paid for. She left out the part where she demanded I co-sign a loan for a luxury car for her unemployed son-in-law. She crafted a story where she was the helpless victim and I was the cold, calculating villain, and the world was eating it up. The comments section was a cesspool of misplaced sympathy. Women I had known since childhood, deacons from the church and distant cousins, were all chiming in. They called me ungrateful. They quoted scriptures about honoring thy father and mother. They speculated that I had lost my way or that money had corrupted my soul. Then came the direct messages. This is what psychologists call the attack of the flying monkeys. These are the enablers, the people the narcissist recruits to do their dirty work. My inbox was flooded with guilt trips and accusations. Auntie May, who had eaten the burnt turkey, sent a text that was 3 paragraphs long. She told me that I should be ashamed of myself. She said that God does not bless people who mistreat their parents. She asked how I could sleep at night knowing my sister was shivering in the cold. Cousin Beatrice sent a message saying that family is everything and that I needed to humble myself and apologize before it was too late. Even the pastor's wife sent a gentle but condescending note urging me to pray for forgiveness and to open my heart and my wallet back up to those in need. I sat there in the silence of my hotel suite, reading message after message. It was a coordinated assault on my character. For a moment, a brief fleeting moment, I felt the old familiar pang of guilt. It is a powerful conditioning mechanism. When 50 people tell you that you are wrong, your brain starts to question reality. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should have given them a warning. Maybe I was the monster they said I was. But then I remembered the spreadsheet. I remembered the voice of Kyle calling me visionless while demanding a Porsche. I remembered Jasmine mocking my single status while spending my money on dresses she would never pay for. I remembered my mother telling me I was banned from the table until I apologized. The guilt evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. They were using my silence against me. They thought that because I was private and dignified, I would not fight back. They thought they could shame me into submission. They were wrong. Evelyn had made a fatal tactical error. She had assumed that the truth was subjective. But in my world, the world of finance and risk assessment, the truth is mathematical, the truth is documented, the truth leaves a paper trail. I did not reply to Auntie May. I did not reply to the pastor's wife. I did not comment on the Facebook post to defend myself. Engaging with them would only validate their drama. Instead, I opened my laptop. I navigated to my secure cloud storage and found a folder I had created 3 days ago. Inside was a single PDF file. It was 20 pages long. The file was titled Consolidated Statement of Account, Authorized User Kyle. Evelyn had gone online and told the world that I was abandoning a struggling young family. She had told the world that Kyle was a hardworking man trying to build a future. She had weaponized the community against me based on a lie. I looked at the file, my finger hovering over the share button. I could send this to everyone. I could post it in the comments section of her sob story. I could email it to Auntie May. But that was too messy. That was too emotional. I needed to be surgical. I needed to drop a bomb that would implode their alliance from the inside out. I opened the family group chat, the one named Family Love that they had been using to coordinate their attacks on me. It contained Evelyn, Jasmine, and Kyle. I dragged the PDF file into the chat window. I did not add a caption. I did not write a long explanation. I simply attached the file. Then I typed a single sentence. Mom, since you are so concerned about where the money went, I thought you should see exactly what Kyle has been buying with the emergency fund while Jasmine is at home pregnant. I hit send. The message marked as delivered. Then almost instantly it marked as read by all three of them. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of my water. In Atlanta, phones were buzzing. In Atlanta, the narrative was about to shift violently. Evelyn wanted a victim. I just gave her one. But it wasn't me. It was her daughter Jasmine who was about to find out exactly how her husband spent his evenings. The flying monkeys could wait. The real show was just beginning inside the house. The file took exactly 3 seconds to upload to the family group chat, but the explosion it caused would last a lifetime. I sat in my hotel suite watching the little read receipts appear one by one. First Evelyn, then Jasmine, then Kyle. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of catastrophic realization. I had titled the document simply Consolidated Statement of Account Authorized User Kyle, but it might as well have been titled The End of the Marriage. Inside that PDF was a detailed chronology of betrayal. While Jasmine was at home elevating her swollen feet and researching nursery colors, Kyle was busy building a very different kind of life. Page 3 detailed the crypto losses. He had transferred $15,000 of my money into a platform called CoinVault Pro, which I had flagged as a Ponzi scheme months ago. He bought a token called Moon Rocket, which crashed to zero value within 48 hours. $15,000 vaporized into the digital ether because he thought he was smarter than the market. But page 4 was where the real damage lived. It was a list of transactions from a venue called the Golden Peach. To the uninitiated, it might sound like a restaurant, but anyone in Atlanta knows it is a notorious gentlemen's club known for its aggressive upselling and private VIP rooms. The charges were staggering. $500 for a bottle of vodka that costs $30 at the store, $2,000 for a private room rental on a Tuesday night, $1,000 in cash withdrawals from the club's ATM, likely for tips. I could close my eyes and see the scene in the living room as clearly as if I were standing there. Jasmine would be holding her phone, her hands trembling. She would scroll past the crypto losses, which were bad enough, and land on the Golden Peach charges. The timestamp on one of the charges was from 2 weeks ago, on the same night Kyle had claimed he was at a late-night networking event with real estate developers. The group chat exploded. Jasmine sent a voice note. I did not play it immediately, but I could see the waveform was erratic and spiked with loud volume. I imagined her screaming, "You said you were working, you said you were building a future for us. You spent $2,000 on strippers while I was buying generic diapers." Kyle's reaction was predictable. He did not apologize. He did not beg for forgiveness. He went on the offensive. A text message popped up from him in the main chat. "This is a misunderstanding. Sophia is manipulating the data. Those were business meetings. The Golden Peach has the best stake in the city. I was meeting with high-level investors. That is where deals get done in this town. You girls do not understand how the world works." It was the classic gaslight maneuver. He was trying to convince his pregnant wife that spending $5,000 at a strip club was a noble sacrifice for the family business. He was banking on Jasmine's insecurity and her desperate need to believe in him. And then came the most painful part of it all. My mother's intervention. I expected Evelyn to be furious. I expected her to defend her daughter. I expected her to eviscerate Kyle for wasting the money she felt entitled to. But I had underestimated her internalized misogyny and her desperate need to keep a man, any man, in the house. Evelyn typed a message that made my stomach turn. "Everyone calm down. Kyle is right. Men have needs and they have different ways of doing business. We cannot judge him for trying to network. The real problem here is Sophia. Look at what she is doing. She is digging up dirt to tear this family apart on Thanksgiving. She is invading Kyle's privacy and shaming him. This is evil. Sophia is trying to ruin your marriage, Jasmine, because she is jealous that you have a husband and she does not." I stared at the screen, stunned by the sheer mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion. My mother was staring at proof that her son-in-law was a liar and a thief, and her reaction was to attack the whistleblower. She was teaching Jasmine that being cheated on was acceptable, but exposing the cheater was a sin. She was protecting the predator to maintain the illusion of a happy family. In the living room back in Atlanta, the dynamic shifted. Empowered by Evelyn's defense, Kyle puffed his chest out. "See, Jasmine," he probably said. "Even your mom gets it. Sophia is just bitter. She wants you to be lonely like her. Do not let her win." Jasmine, broken and confused, would likely sink into the sofa sobbing, not because she believed him, but because the alternative was too terrified to face. She had no job. She had no money. If she left him, she would be alone. So she swallowed the lie. She let her mother smooth things over. She let Kyle play the victim. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Every time Kyle left the house now, Jasmine would wonder. Every time he mentioned a meeting, she would check the clock. I had destroyed the trust that allowed their parasitic relationship to function. My phone buzzed with a private message. It was from Kyle. He had left the group chat to confront me directly where the women could not see his true face. The message was short and venomous. "You think you are smart, don't you? You have no right to look at my transactions. That is confidential financial information. I am going to sue you for invasion of privacy and defamation. You better turn the cards back on and apologize, or I will drag you to court and take every dime you have." I laughed out loud in the quiet luxury of my hotel room. It was a genuine belly laugh. He was threatening to sue the owner of the account for looking at her own statement. He was threatening to drag a risk assessment expert to court with dirty hands. I did not reply to his threat. I did not need to. I simply took a screenshot of his text and saved it to a new folder titled Evidence for Divorce Attorney. If he wanted a legal battle, he was bringing a water gun to a nuclear war. I put my phone down and ordered another glass of wine. The first layer of their denial had been peeled back, but the winter was just beginning, and I had plenty more documents where that came from. They thought they could silence me with threats, but they forgot that I held the only thing that mattered in their world, the checkbook. 2 weeks had passed since the Thanksgiving disaster, and the sprawling colonial house in Atlanta had transformed from a symbol of status into a frozen mausoleum. The temperature in Georgia had dropped uncharacteristically low, dipping into the 20s at night, and the universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of timing. At 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, the central heating unit in the basement gave a final rattling cough and died. By sunrise, the temperature inside the house was 48 degrees. My mother Evelyn woke up seeing her own breath misting in the air of her master bedroom. She wrapped herself in 3 layers of blankets and shuffled downstairs, expecting the problem to be a simple thermostat glitch. But when she checked the digital display in the hallway, the screen was blank. The backup battery had died months ago, and I was the only one who ever remembered to change it. Evelyn called the HVAC repair company, the one I had used for a decade. Her voice was high and imperious, trying to mask the desperation rising in her chest. She demanded an emergency service call. The receptionist was polite but firm. "We can certainly send a technician out, Mrs. Brooks. The emergency dispatch fee is $250 and parts and labor will be extra. We will need a credit card on file to book the appointment." Evelyn stared at the phone. Her personal savings account, a small stash she had hidden away from me for years to buy bingo tickets and church hats, was down to its last $100. She had spent the rest on takeout food and wine in the first week of the boycott, assuming I would cave and turn the money back on before she ran out. She hung up the phone without saying a word. There would be no repairman. There would be no heat. Down the hall, Jasmine was waking up to a different kind of cold. The cold of realization. She lay in bed shivering, her stomach growling with a hunger she had never experienced in her life. The refrigerator was empty. The pantry held only a box of stale crackers and a jar of capers. Kyle was gone, having slipped out early to meet with yet another shady friend, who he claimed had a sure-thing investment, leaving his pregnant wife to starve in a freezing mansion. Jasmine dragged herself out of bed and walked into her walk-in closet. It was a shrine to consumerism. Rows of designer shoes, racks of silk blouses, and shelves of handbags that cost more than most people's cars. For years she had looked at this room and felt rich. She had felt superior. But as she stood there hugging her arms for warmth, the truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. She did not own any of this. She reached out and touched a quilted black Chanel handbag sitting on the top shelf. I had bought it for her 25th birthday. It cost $6,000. She remembered how she had snatched it from the box without saying thank you, complaining that she wanted the gold hardware instead of the silver. Now that bag wasn't a fashion statement. It was a lifeline. It was groceries. It was electricity. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and humiliating. She grabbed the bag along with a pair of pristine Louboutin heels she had worn once and stuffed them into a reusable grocery sack. She felt like a thief in her own home. She had to sneak out the back door so Evelyn wouldn't see her. If our mother knew that the golden child was pawning off the family jewels, the illusion of their dignity would shatter completely. Jasmine drove to a high-end consignment shop in Buckhead, the kind of place where she used to shop, not sell. She walked to the counter, keeping her head down, praying she wouldn't run into anyone she knew from her sorority or the country club. The clerk, a woman with sharp eyes and a bored expression, examined the bag with clinical detachment. "We can offer you $800 for the bag and $200 for the shoes," the clerk said, tossing them onto the counter. Jasmine gasped. $800. That bag is worth $6,000. It is practically new. The clerk shrugged, not even looking up from her computer. "It is used inventory, honey. The market is flooded right now. Take it or leave it." Jasmine wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the bag at the woman's head and storm out, but her stomach twisted in a painful knot of hunger. She thought about the dark, cold house waiting for her. She thought about the baby growing inside her, depending on her for nourishment. She swallowed her pride, a taste more bitter than any medicine. "I will take it," she whispered. She left the store with a check for $1,000. It felt like a fortune and a pittance all at once. She drove straight to the grocery store. Not the organic market she usually frequented, but a discount chain where she could stretch the money further. She walked the aisles, calculating prices in her head for the first time in her life. She bought rice, beans, frozen vegetables, and cheap cuts of meat. She stared at a package of premium steak, the kind Kyle demanded for dinner, and then put it back, grabbing the ground beef instead. As she pushed the cart to her car, the reality of her existence settled over her like a heavy shroud. She was 30 years old. She had no degree because she had dropped out of college when it got too hard, claiming the professors were biased against her. She had no work history because I had always employed her as a consultant for my company, a fake title that required zero work. She had no skills. She could not type. She could not cook. She could not manage a budget. Without me, without my stream of money, she was useless. She was a child playing house in a grown woman's body, and the game was over. She returned to the house as the sun was setting, the gray light of winter fading into darkness. The house was even colder now. She found Evelyn sitting in the kitchen, huddled near the gas stove, which she had turned on to generate a tiny radius of heat, a dangerous and desperate move. "I got food," Jasmine said, putting the bags on the counter. Evelyn did not ask where the money came from. She simply looked at the groceries with relief, her eyes hollow. They cooked in silence, eating the simple meal while wearing their winter coats. The grandeur of the dining room mocked them. The crystal chandelier hung above them, useless without electricity to light it. They were squatters in a palace surrounded by luxury they could not afford to maintain. Just as they were finishing, a sharp rap echoed from the front door. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was the authoritative, heavy knock of official business. Evelyn jumped, her hand flying to her chest. "Who is that at this hour?" "I will get it," Jasmine said, glad for an excuse to move and generate some body heat. She opened the heavy oak door. A courier stood there, shivering in the wind. He held a thick, rigid envelope in his hand. "Delivery for Evelyn Brooks and Jasmine Brooks," he said, holding out an electronic pad. "Sign here, please." Jasmine signed, her fingers numb from the cold. The courier handed her the envelope and practically ran back to his warm van. Jasmine looked down at the package. It was a certified letter, the red stamp vivid against the white paper. She closed the door and walked back to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She handed the envelope to Evelyn. "What is it?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. "I do not know," Jasmine whispered. "Open it." Evelyn tore open the tab. She pulled out a stack of documents. The letterhead at the top was embossed in gold foil. Sterling and Vance Attorneys at Law. It was one of the most ruthless firms in the city. Evelyn began to read, her lips moving silently. Then she stopped. The color drained from her face, leaving her gray and aged. She dropped the paper onto the table as if it were burning her skin. "What does it say, Mom?" Jasmine asked, grabbing the letter. Jasmine's eyes scanned the legal jargon, skipping over the whereas and therefore clauses until she hit the bold text in the center of the page. It was a notice to quit, a formal demand for possession of the property. "It says we have 30 days. Jasmine read, her voice shaking so hard the words were barely audible. "It says the owner of the property, Sophia Brooks, is terminating our tenancy at will. We have 30 days to vacate the premises or face eviction proceedings." Evelyn let out a low, keen wail, a sound of pure devastation. But Jasmine did not cry. She looked at the letter, then at the dark, freezing house. 30 days. They had 30 days before they were on the street. And for the first time, Jasmine realized that no amount of tears, no amount of tantrums, and no amount of calling me names would fix this. The Bank of Sophia was not just closed, it was foreclosing. The paper felt heavy in Evelyn's hands, heavier than the freezing air that seemed to press against the walls of the silent mansion. It was a thick, cream-colored document, the kind used for official legal correspondence, embossed with the intimidating logo of Sterling and Vance, a law firm known in Atlanta not for their compassion, but for their ruthless efficiency in corporate litigation. Jasmine stood across the kitchen island, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth, watching her mother's face transform from confusion to a pale, hollow shock. Evelyn read the first paragraph. Then she read it again. Her lips moved silently, forming words she refused to comprehend. Notice to quit. Termination of tenancy at will. Immediate surrender of premises. These were terms reserved for criminals, for people who did not pay their rent in low-income apartments, not for the matriarch of the Brooks family living in her ancestral home. "What does it say, Mom?" Jasmine asked again, her voice trembling. Evelyn looked up, her eyes wide and unseeing. "It says we have to leave. It says the owner is reclaiming the property." The owner? Jasmine frowned, confusion knitting her brow. "What are you talking about? Daddy owned this house. He left it to you. We own it." Evelyn looked back down at the document, specifically at the line identifying the plaintiff. Property owner, SP Holdings LLC, represented by Sophia Brooks, managing partner. For 5 years, Evelyn had lived in a comfortable delusion. When her husband Robert died, the finances were a disaster. He had leveraged the house to pay for bad investments and secret debts. The bank was days away from foreclosure when Sophia had stepped in. Sophia had handled all the paperwork, told Evelyn not to worry, and said she had taken care of the bank. Evelyn, in her grief and entitlement, had assumed Sophia simply paid off the mortgage and that the deed remained in the family name. She had never asked. She had never checked. She had simply continued to live like a queen, assuming the castle was hers by divine right. But now the truth was printed in black and white. Sophia had not paid off the mortgage for Evelyn. Sophia had bought the debt. She had purchased the house from the bank through her holding company. SP Holdings, Sophia Patrice Holdings. She owns it, Evelyn whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical slap. Sophia owns the house. She has owned it for 5 years. We are not owners. We are guests. The silence that followed was deafening. The grand kitchen, with its marble countertops and custom cabinetry, suddenly felt like a stage set that was being struck after the final curtain. They were not standing in their legacy. They were standing in Sophia's asset. Evelyn's shock quickly curdled into a blinding, white-hot rage. She grabbed her phone, her frozen fingers fumbling to unlock the screen. She dialed Sophia's number. It went straight to voicemail, as it had for weeks, but this time Evelyn did not hang up. She waited for the beep, and then she screamed. "You ungrateful, deceitful child!" Evelyn shrieked into the phone, her voice echoing off the cold tiles. "How dare you? How dare you try to evict your own mother? I gave you life. I raised you in this house. This is my home. Your father built this for me, not for you to turn into some business transaction. You think a piece of paper makes you the owner. I am your mother. You owe me this roof over my head. If you do not call off these lawyers, I will ruin you. I will tell everyone what a heartless monster you are." She threw the phone onto the counter, panting, her breath visible in the frigid air. She turned to Jasmine, expecting solidarity, expecting her golden child to join in the outrage. But Jasmine was staring at the letter, her face pale. "Mom," Jasmine whispered, "if she owns the house, that means she can sell it. That means we have nowhere to go." "We are not going anywhere," a voice boomed from the hallway. Kyle walked in. He had returned from his mysterious errands, looking disheveled and smelling faintly of cheap cologne and desperation. He saw the legal papers on the counter and snatched them up. He scanned the document, his eyes narrowing. He did not look sad. He did not look scared. He looked calculated. "So the princess finally made her move," Kyle sneered, tossing the paper back onto the marble. "She thinks she can just kick us out like we are tenants in one of her commercial buildings." "She is kicking us out," Jasmine cried, tears finally spilling over. "We have 30 days, Kyle. 30 days. Kyle laughed, a harsh barking sound that lacked any real humor. 30 days. Please. She obviously does not know who she is dealing with. He walked over to the fridge, opened it, saw it was empty, and slammed it shut. Listen to me. In the state of Georgia, you cannot just throw people out on the street, especially not family. We have established residency here. I have mail coming here. You have lived here for 30 years, Evelyn. He turned to his mother-in-law, his eyes gleaming with a manic intensity. Do not pack a single box, Evelyn. Do not let her scare you. This is just an intimidation tactic. She wants us to run away with our tails between our legs. But the letter says... Evelyn began, her voice weak. Forget the letter, Kyle interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. I know the law. I have been researching this ever since she cut the cards. There is something called adverse possession. There are squatter rights. If we refuse to leave, she has to take us to court. That process takes months, maybe even a year. And no judge is going to throw a pregnant woman and an elderly widow out into the snow. He walked over to Jasmine and grabbed her shoulders, shaking her slightly. We are staying right here. We are going to change the locks. If she wants this house back, she is going to have to drag us out physically. And imagine how that will look for her precious business reputation. The wealthy Sophia Brooks sending a SWAT team to evict her pregnant sister. We will go to the press. We will make her look like the devil. Evelyn listened, and slowly the panic in her eyes was replaced by a familiar defiance. Kyle was right. She was the victim here. Sophia was the aggressor. How could a daughter do this? It was unnatural. It was cruel. And Evelyn Brooks never backed down from a fight, especially when she felt she had the moral high ground, however twisted that ground might be. You are right, Kyle, Evelyn said, straightening her spine, pulling her coat tighter around her. This is my house. I do not care whose name is on the deed. I have a moral right to be here. We are not going anywhere. Jasmine looked between her husband and her mother, her stomach churning with nausea. She saw the madness in their eyes. They were talking about squatting. They were talking about a war. She looked at the eviction notice again. SP Holdings. She remembered Sophia's office, the way Sophia commanded respect, the way Sophia always had a backup plan for her backup plan. Kyle, Jasmine said softly, I do not think we should fight her on this. Sophia does not bluff. If she sent this letter, she is ready. Kyle spun around, his face twisting into a sneer. Whose side are you on, Jasmine? Are you on the side of the sister who cut off your food and heat? Or are you on the side of your husband who is trying to keep a roof over your head? Stop being weak. We are digging in. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. Inside, the battle lines were drawn. Evelyn and Kyle chose to stand their ground on a sinking ship, convinced that their entitlement would keep them afloat. They did not realize that by refusing to leave, they were walking directly into a trap that Sophia had set 5 years ago. They thought they were squatters with rights. But to Sophia, they were just liabilities that were about to be liquidated. And as the night deepened, the house seemed to groan, as if it too was ready to expel the parasites that had been feeding on it for far too long. 3 days after the eviction notice was delivered, I returned to Atlanta, not as a daughter coming home for the holidays, but as a landlord inspecting a distressed asset. I did not drive my usual understated sedan. Instead, I arrived in a black SUV with tinted windows, followed closely by a second vehicle carrying 2 men who were essential to the day's proceedings. One was Marcus Vance, my lead attorney, whose hourly rate was higher than Kyle's annual income potential. The other was a private security contractor named David, a man the size of a linebacker who specialized in executive protection. We pulled into the driveway, and the sight of the house made my jaw tighten. The lawn was overgrown, trash cans were overflowing, and the Porsche that Kyle had somehow managed to keep, despite his financial ruin, was parked diagonally across the grass, tearing up the dormant sod I had paid thousands to install. The house looked abandoned, a shell of its former glory, much like the people inside it. I stepped out of the car, the cold wind whipping my trench coat around my legs. I adjusted my sunglasses and walked toward the front door, flanked by Vance and David. I did not knock. I used my key. But as I slid it into the lock, the mechanism jammed. They had changed the locks, a petty, futile gesture of defiance. I rang the doorbell. Once, twice, long sustained rings that echoed inside. Finally, the door swung open. Kyle stood there wearing a bathrobe that had seen better days, looking like he hadn't slept or showered in a week. When he saw me, a smirk spread across his face, a look of arrogant triumph that was completely unearned. "Well, look who decided to show up," Kyle sneered, leaning against the doorframe in a pose he probably thought looked intimidating. "If you are looking for a key, don't bother. We change the locks. It is within our rights as residents to secure the property against intruders." I stared at him, my expression unreadable. Intruder. That is an interesting word choice for the owner of the deed. Kyle laughed, crossing his arms. He cleared his throat, preparing to launch into the speech he had undoubtedly rehearsed in front of the mirror. "Actually, Sophia, since you want to get technical, let me educate you on the law. I have been doing some reading. You see, in the state of Georgia, once a person has established residency for a certain period, they are no longer guests. They are tenants, and you cannot just kick tenants out because you are having a temper tantrum." He took a step forward, his voice taking on a condescending lecture hall tone. "It is called adverse possession, Sophia. Or maybe you know it as squatter rights. We have possession of the property. We have utility bills in our name well before you illegally cut them off, which is another lawsuit waiting to happen. You have to go through a formal eviction process which takes months. And even then, if we can prove hardship, like, say, a pregnant wife and an elderly mother in the dead of winter, no judge is going to sign that order. So you can take your expensive lawyer and get off our porch. You have no power here." He finished his speech with a smug nod, looking at my lawyer, Mr. Vance, as if expecting him to crumble under the weight of this Wikipedia-level legal knowledge. I looked at Kyle, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind his eyes, the desperate need to be the man, the alpha, the one in control. It was pathetic. "Are you finished, Kyle?" I asked quietly. He blinked, surprised by my lack of reaction. "I am just telling you the facts. You played your hand too early. You can't touch us." I turned to Mr. Vance. "Marcus, would you please clarify the concept of adverse possession for my brother-in-law?" Vance stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a file. "Mr. Brooks, adverse possession in Georgia requires 20 years of continuous hostile and exclusive possession. You have lived here for 2 years as a guest. Furthermore, squatter rights do not apply when there is a violation of the occupancy agreement, specifically regarding criminal activity." Kyle scoffed. "Criminal activity? What are you talking about? Being broke isn't a crime." "No," I said, stepping into his personal space. "Being broke isn't a crime. But running an unregistered multi-level marketing scheme out of a residential property is. And using my garage to store illegal inventory is definitely a crime." I pulled a stack of photos from my own bag and fanned them out like a winning poker hand. Kyle's eyes widened as he looked at the images. They were high-resolution photos taken inside the garage 3 weeks ago by the insurance inspector I had sent over for a routine annual check, an appointment Kyle had forgotten about. The photos showed stacks of cardboard boxes labeled Quantum Vitality. Inside the open boxes were hundreds of bottles of unregulated herbal supplements. But the damning photo was the one in the corner showing several heat lamps and a small but distinct collection of cannabis plants that Kyle had decided to cultivate, likely to supplement his income when the crypto market crashed. "This," I said, pointing to the plants, "is a felony distribution operation. And this, pointing to the boxes, is an unregistered commercial business operating in a residential zone without a permit. Both of these are direct violations of the property insurance policy and the occupancy terms Jasmine signed 5 years ago." Kyle's face drained of color. That is just for personal use. And the supplements are legal. It is a startup. It is a pyramid scheme, Kyle," I corrected him sharply. "And the quantity of plants in that garage exceeds the legal limit for personal use in this state. But that is not even the point. The point is, the moment you used my property to commit a crime, you forfeited any tenancy protections you thought you had. I can have the police here in 10 minutes to raid that garage. And once they find the plants and the unpermitted business inventory, they will arrest you. And since the house is the site of the crime, they could condemn it or seize it as evidence. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the air outside. So, here is your choice. You can keep playing lawyer and quoting statutes you do not understand, in which case I call the detective I have on speed dial, or you can accept that you have lost. Kyle opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His mansplaining, his arrogance, his delusion, it all evaporated in the face of hard, cold evidence. He looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a fraud. Jasmine appeared in the hallway behind him, wrapped in a blanket. She had heard everything. She looked at the photos in my hand, then at her husband. She didn't say a word, but the look of disgust on her face spoke volumes. Suddenly, flashing blue lights reflected off the windows of the house. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb right behind my SUV. Kyle jumped, panic seizing him. "You called them. You actually called them." I checked my watch. "Not for the drugs, Kyle. Not yet. That is a card I am saving for later." A uniformed officer walked up the driveway. He looked at the Porsche parked on the lawn, then at the group of us on the porch. "Good afternoon," the officer said, tipping his hat. "I am looking for the owner of a black Porsche Taycan license plate King Kyle. We received a report of an abandoned vehicle parked illegally on the grass, blocking the fire hydrant access. Also, the registration on the vehicle seems to be expired." Kyle looked at me, betrayal written all over his face. "You reported my car." I smiled, a thin, razor-sharp smile. "It is not your car, Kyle. You never made the payments. And it is parked on my grass. I am just being a responsible property owner." I turned to the officer. "That would be this gentleman here, officer. Please do what you need to do." As the officer began to question a stammering Kyle about his expired registration and the illegal parking, I walked past them, pushing the front door open wide. I signaled for David, my bodyguard, to follow me inside. It was time to inspect the damage to my investment and to have a very long, very overdue conversation with my mother. The direct confrontation was over. I hadn't just won, I had dominated, and I hadn't even raised my voice. The blue lights of the police cruiser faded into the distance, taking with them the last shred of Kyle's dignity. The officer had not arrested him, but the warning was clear. The illegal business in the garage had to be dismantled immediately, or Kyle would be leaving the property in handcuffs. Sophia had left us in the driveway, shivering and humiliated, her black SUV disappearing down the street like a funeral hearse carrying away our future. We retreated back into the freezing house. The silence between us was heavy, suffocating. Kyle did not apologize for the lies or the drugs or the humiliation. Instead, he paced the living room floor like a caged animal, his eyes darting around the shadows as if looking for a trap door. He was muttering to himself, cursing Sophia, cursing the police, cursing the world that refused to recognize his genius. I sat on the sofa, wrapped in 3 blankets, trying to stop my teeth from chattering. My mother, Evelyn, had retreated to her bedroom, claiming a migraine, but I knew she was hiding from the reality that her son-in-law was a fraud. I watched Kyle pacing, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. He was not a visionary entrepreneur. He was a desperate man drowning in his own incompetence. "Jasmine," he said, suddenly stopping in front of me. His voice was too loud in the quiet room. "Give me your phone," I asked, clutching it tighter. "I need to check something. My data is throttled. Just give it to me." I handed it to him. I always handed it to him. He was my husband. He tapped the screen frantically, his thumbs moving in a blur. I watched his face illuminated by the blue light. He looked manic. Beads of sweat were forming on his forehead, despite the 40-degree temperature in the house. After 5 minutes, he handed the phone back to me and walked into the kitchen. I did not think much of it until an hour later. I was trying to distract myself by scrolling through old photos of vacations we took when Sophia was paying for everything. Then a banner notification dropped down from the top of my screen. It was an alert from Credit Karma. Your credit score has dropped significantly. I frowned. That did not make sense. I did not have any credit cards anymore because Sophia had cut them all off. My score should be stagnant, not dropping. I tapped the notification. The app opened slowly on the sluggish data connection. When the dashboard finally loaded, I gasped. My score had plummeted by 60 points in a single day. I scrolled down to the section labeled New Inquiries. There was a hard inquiry from a company called Swift Cash Lenders, LLC, and below that a notification that a high-interest personal loan of $10,000 had been approved and deposited. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Swift Cash. That was a predatory payday loan company, the kind that charged 400% interest. The kind that broke kneecaps if you did not pay. Kyle. I called out, my voice trembling. Kyle, come here. He walked back into the living room holding a glass of tap water. What is it now, Jasmine? Can't you see I am trying to think of a strategy to save this house? Did you take out a loan in my name? I asked, holding up the phone. He froze. He did not look at me. He looked at the wall. I did what I had to do, Jasmine. We have expenses. We need to pay a lawyer to fight Sophia. I needed liquidity. You used my social security number, I whispered. You stole my identity. Kyle. That is a crime. That is what Sophia said you would do. Do not talk to me about what Sophia said, he snapped, slamming the glass down on the table. Water sloshed over the rim, ruining the finish, but neither of us cared. Sophia is the enemy. I am your husband. I am doing this for us. Do you want to be homeless? Do you want to have this baby in a shelter? I took the loan to save us because you are too weak to do anything but cry. He was not sorry. He was angry that I had caught him. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. He did not care about my credit score. He did not care about my future. He viewed me as a resource to be mined. I was just another account to be drained. You have to send it back, I said, standing up and letting the blankets fall to the floor. Send the money back right now, Kyle. I am not starting my life with a predatory loan on my record. I can't send it back, he yelled, stepping closer to me. His face was twisted into a snarl I had never seen before. It is already gone. I sent it to the crypto wallet. I have a sure thing trade that is going to triple by morning. I will pay the loan back tomorrow, and we will have 20 grand profit. You just have to trust me. Trust you, I screamed. My voice cracked. Trust you. You spent $15,000 at a strip club while I was pregnant. You grew drugs in my mother's garage. You lied about the Porsche. And now you stole my identity to gamble on cryptocurrency. You are sick, Kyle. You are a liar and a thief. The slap came out of nowhere. It wasn't physical, but his reaction was violent. He grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging into my flesh through my sweater. He shook me hard enough to make my head snap back. Shut up, he roared, spit flying from his lips. You useless, spoiled brat. You have never worked a day in your life. You think you are better than me because your sister has money. You are nothing without her, and you are nothing without me. I am the only one trying to fix this mess. You should be thanking me. I looked into his eyes and I saw a stranger. No, not a stranger. I saw a monster. This was the man I had defended against my own sister. This was the man I had chosen over Sophia. I had burned bridges for him, and now he was burning me. Get off me, I hissed, shoving him away with a strength I did not know I had. He stumbled back, surprised by my resistance. I am done, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I am calling the police. I am reporting the identity theft, and I am telling them about the drugs. Sophia was right. You are a parasite. Kyle looked at me, and for a second I thought he was going to hit me for real. His hands curled into fists. His breathing was ragged. But then a different look crossed his face. Calculation. Cold, hard calculation. Fine, he said quietly. Call them. See if they care. He turned around and walked out of the room. I heard him go upstairs. I collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing into my hands. I wanted to call the police, but my fingers were shaking too hard to dial. I was terrified. I was pregnant, freezing, and married to a criminal. I curled into a ball waiting for him to come back down and apologize. Waiting for the Kyle I thought I knew to return. But he did not come back down. Not for a long time. The house grew darker as the sun set. The temperature dropped further. Upstairs I heard footsteps, heavy footsteps moving back and forth. I heard drawers opening and closing. I thought he was packing a bag to leave. Good, I thought. Let him leave. It was almost midnight when he finally came downstairs. He was wearing his heavy winter coat and carrying a large duffel bag. He did not look at me. He walked straight to the front door. "Where are you going?" I asked, weakly sitting up. He stopped with his hand on the doorknob. "I'm going to make some moves. Don't wait up." He opened the door and the icy wind rushed in. Then he was gone. I sat there for 10 minutes staring at the closed door. A terrible feeling began to gnaw at the pit of my stomach. Something was wrong. The silence was too deep. I pulled myself up and walked to the stairs. My legs felt heavy as lead. I climbed the steps to our bedroom. The door was open. I walked in and turned on the flashlight on my phone. The room was a mess. Clothes were scattered everywhere. The drawers of the dresser were pulled out and emptied. But my eyes were drawn to the vanity table in the corner. My jewelry box, a beautiful mahogany chest that had belonged to my grandmother, was open. I walked over to it, my breath catching in my throat. It was empty. My diamond engagement ring, which I had taken off to sleep. Gone. The pearl necklace Sophia gave me for my 30th birthday. Gone. The vintage sapphire earrings from my mother. Gone. Even the gold bracelet I had bought for myself with my first allowance check. Gone. He had taken everything, every piece of value I owned, every asset I had left in this world. I ran to the closet. His side was empty, his shoes were gone. I ran to the window and looked out at the driveway. The pickup truck was gone. He wasn't coming back. He hadn't gone to make a trade. He had cashed out. He had liquidated his last remaining asset, his wife, and skipped town. A scream tore from my throat, a primal sound of pure agony. It wasn't just about the money, it was the betrayal. He had left me pregnant, penniless, and alone in a freezing house that I was about to be evicted from. I sank to the floor amidst the scattered clothes, clutching the empty jewelry box to my chest. Down the hall, my mother's door remained closed. She had heard the screaming. She had heard the truck leave, but she did not come out. She stayed in her room protecting her own delusion, leaving me to bleed out on the floor of a marriage that was nothing more than a long con. I was the golden child, the pretty one, the lucky one. But as I lay there in the dark with the wind howling against the glass, I realized Sophia was the lucky one. She was free. And I was just the collateral damage of a war I had been too blind to see. The sun rose over the Brooks estate with a cruel brightness, illuminating the wreckage of a family that had once thought itself untouchable. Inside the freezing house, the air was heavy with the scent of stale fear and betrayal. I was not there to witness the aftermath of Kyle's departure, but the security cameras I had installed years ago for their protection now served as a window into their downfall. In the living room, Jasmine was still curled on the floor, where she had collapsed the night before. She was wrapped in a tangle of expensive cashmere blankets that offered little protection against the biting cold of a house with no heating. Her eyes were swollen shut from crying, and her hands were clutched tightly around the empty jewelry box that had once held her entire net worth. At 8 in the morning, my mother Evelyn finally emerged from her bedroom. She walked down the grand staircase, wearing her mink coat indoors, a grotesque display of faded glamour against the backdrop of destitution. She saw Jasmine on the floor, and for a moment a flicker of genuine concern crossed her face. But it was quickly replaced by annoyance. In Evelyn's world, emotional displays were inconvenient, especially when there were practical problems to be solved. "Get up, Jasmine," Evelyn said, her voice raspy from the cold. "Lying on the floor will not bring him back. We need to formulate a plan." Jasmine sat up slowly, her movements stiff and painful. She looked at her mother with hollow eyes. "He took everything, Mom. He took the diamonds. He took the pearls. He even took the gold locket Grandma gave me. And he took out a loan in my name. I am ruined. I have minus $10,000 and a credit score that will flag me as a risk for the rest of my life." Evelyn stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Her hand went to her throat, instinctively checking for her own necklace before remembering she was wearing a scarf. "He stole the pearls," she whispered. "Those were my mother's pearls. I let you wear them for the wedding. How could you let him take them? I didn't let him do anything." Jasmine screamed, her voice cracking. "He is a thief, Mom. He is a criminal. And we defended him. We chose him over Sophia. We treated Sophia like garbage to protect a man who just robbed us blind." Evelyn stiffened. "Do not rewrite history, Jasmine. Sophia abandoned us. If Sophia had not cut off the accounts, Kyle would not have been desperate. This is her fault as much as it is his." She pushed him into a corner. What did she expect a man to do when he cannot provide for his family? It was a masterclass in delusion. Even now, standing in the wreckage of her own poor judgment, Evelyn could not accept responsibility. In her mind, she was still the victim. She was the matriarch who had been wronged by a rebellious daughter and deceived by a desperate son-in-law. She refused to see that she had cultivated the very environment that allowed Kyle to thrive. She had valued appearance over substance and flattery over loyalty. "We have to call her," Jasmine said, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her coat. "We have no food. We have no heat. We have an eviction notice that expires in 2 weeks. And now I have debt collectors coming for me. We have to beg Sophia to help us." Evelyn straightened her back, smoothing the fur of her coat. "We will not beg. We are Brooke's women. We do not beg. But you are right. We need to contact her. She has made her point. She has punished us enough. Now she needs to step up and fix this mess before it becomes a public scandal. If people find out your husband is a thief and we are living like squatters, it will ruin our reputation at the church." She truly believed that the biggest tragedy here was the potential gossip, not the fact that her daughter was pregnant and starving. Evelyn walked to the kitchen, where the landline still had a faint dial tone because it was a federally mandated emergency line that I could not legally cut. She picked up the receiver and dialed my office number. She knew better than to call my cell phone, which was blocking her. I was sitting in my office in downtown Atlanta, overlooking the skyline. The office was warm, smelling of fresh coffee and success. My assistant Sarah buzzed in. "Ms. Brooks, your mother is on line 1. She says it is a medical emergency." I paused, my hand hovering over the mouse. A medical emergency. It was the oldest trick in the book. But curiosity is a powerful force. "Put her through," I said. The line clicked. Sophia Evelyn's voice came through sharp and demanding. "Thank God you finally answered. We are in a crisis." I leaned back in my chair, putting the phone on speaker. "Good morning, Mother. If this is a medical emergency, do you need me to call an ambulance?" "Don't be facetious," Evelyn snapped. "The emergency is that your sister is pregnant and freezing to death because you turned off the heat. And that husband of hers has lost his mind. He has left. He took some things. We are alone here, Sophia. You have had your little fun. You have taught us a lesson. Now turn the power back on and transfer some money to Jasmine's account. She needs to go to the doctor." I listened to the silence between her words. There was no apology. There was no admission of guilt. There was no realization that she had been wrong about Kyle for years. She was simply demanding that I return to my post as the family servant because the other option had failed. She viewed me not as a person with feelings but as a utility that had malfunctioned and needed to be rebooted. "Where is Kyle?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "He is gone," Evelyn said dismissively. "He turned out to be a disappointment. I always had my doubts about him, you know. I tried to warn Jasmine, but she was in love. But that is in the past. The point is we are family, and family helps each other. You cannot leave your mother and sister in this condition. It is cruel. It is unchristian." I closed my eyes for a second, letting the anger wash over me, and then recede. She was rewriting history in real time, claiming she had doubts about Kyle, when just yesterday she was helping him plan a legal battle against me. She was incapable of change. She was a parasite looking for a new host. But I needed her to believe she had won. I needed them out of the house, and I needed them to sign the surrender papers willingly to avoid a lengthy court battle. I also needed to ensure Jasmine was safe from the debt sharks, not because I forgave her, but because the baby was innocent. "Mother," I said, forcing a softness into my voice that I did not feel. I did not know Kyle had left. "That changes things." "Exactly," Evelyn said triumphantly. "I knew you would see reason. We need $5,000 immediately for food and to get the heating fixed. And we need you to call off this eviction nonsense." "I cannot do that over the phone," I said. "And I cannot just turn the money back on without a plan. If Kyle stole from you, we need to file a police report. We need to document everything." "We do not need police," Evelyn said quickly. "We do not need a scandal. Just give us the money and we will handle it privately." "No," I said firmly. "I am done handing out blank checks. If you want my help, you have to do it my way. I need you and Jasmine to come to my office today, immediately. To your office." Evelyn hesitated. She hated my office. It was a place where I was the boss and she was a guest. It shifted the power dynamic, and she knew it. "Yes. Bring the eviction notice. Bring Jasmine's ID. Bring the documentation of the loans Kyle took out. If you want me to save you, I need to see the full extent of the damage. I will have my legal team review it and we can discuss a settlement." "A settlement," Evelyn repeated, testing the word. She liked the sound of it. It sounded like a payout. It sounded like she was getting what she deserved. "Fine," Evelyn said. "We will be there in an hour. But do not expect us to look presentable. We have been living like animals because of you." She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there staring at the phone. She thought she was coming to negotiate a surrender. She thought she was coming to manipulate me back into submission. She did not realize that she was walking into a closing trap. I pressed the intercom button. "Sarah, get Marcus Vance in here, and have security on standby in the lobby. My family is coming in." Marcus walked in 2 minutes later looking sharp in his navy suit. He sat down opposite me. "So they took the bait. Hook, line, and sinker," I said, turning my computer monitor to show him the file I had been working on. "Kyle has fled, which makes things easier. Jasmine is desperate, and Evelyn is greedy. They are coming here thinking I am going to write them a check and let them move back into the warm house." "And what are you actually going to do?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. "I am going to offer them a choice. They can sign a voluntary surrender of the property and a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for a very small one-time relocation stipend. Or they can leave with nothing, and I will let the foreclosure and the debt collectors consume them." "It is ruthless," Sophia Marcus said quietly. "It is necessary," I replied. "Evelyn thinks she is a victim. Today I am going to show her the difference between being a victim of circumstance and being a casualty of her own war. She wants a settlement. I am going to give her a severance package." I looked out the window at the cold gray sky. They were on their way. The final act was about to begin. I checked my reflection in the dark glass. I did not look like the daughter who used to cry in her bedroom because her mother forgot her birthday. I looked like a CEO who was about to close the most important deal of her life, the deal to buy back my own freedom. The elevator doors to my penthouse office slid open with a soft chime that sounded like the bell of a boxing ring signaling the final round. My assistant Sarah sat at the front desk, her face a mask of professional neutrality, though I could see the tightness around her eyes as she looked at the two women standing in the lobby. My mother Evelyn and my sister Jasmine looked like ghosts of their former selves. Their coats were expensive but wrinkled, their hair was uncharacteristically messy, and they carried the distinct heavy aura of desperation that no amount of designer perfume could mask. I stood behind my glass desk, a fortress of mahogany and steel that separated me from the chaos they brought. I did not walk around to greet them. I did not offer a hug. I simply pointed to the two leather chairs opposite me. "Sit down," I said. My voice was calm, stripped of any inflection. It was the voice I used for hostile takeovers. Evelyn walked in first, clutching a Tupperware container like a shield. She forced a smile that stretched her skin too tight, a grotesque imitation of maternal warmth. "Sophia, darling," she cooed, ignoring the cold reception. "Look at this place. It is magnificent. I always tell my friends at church that my daughter runs this city. You get your business sense from your father, but you get that style from me." She placed the plastic container on my pristine desk. It looked out of place, a domestic artifact in a corporate war room. "I brought you something," she said, popping the lid open. "It is a peace offering. I know things have been tense, and we have said things we did not mean. But I woke up this morning and thought about how much you used to love my baking, so I made your favorite." I looked down at the cake. It was a bundt cake, golden and glazed, sprinkled heavily with crushed green nuts. It smelled of sugar and butter, a scent that should have been comforting, but instead made my stomach turn. "We need to talk about the house." Evelyn continued, her voice rushing now, trying to bypass the awkward silence. "I know you are angry about the loan Kyle took out, and I agree it was terrible. But you cannot punish Jasmine and me for his crimes. We are victims too. We need the heat turned back on Sophia, and we need this eviction notice rescinded. It is just paper after all. You can tear it up. We are family." I leaned back in my chair, tenting my fingers. I watched her face, searching for a single genuine emotion. I saw fear. I saw greed. I saw calculation. But I did not see love. "Before we discuss the house, I said I want to ask you something." Evelyn blinked, surprised by the shift. "Anything, darling. Ask me anything." I picked up a silver pen and twirled it between my fingers. "You say we are family. You say you know me. You say you raised me. So simple question. What is the name of the university I graduated from?" The room went silent. Jasmine, who had been staring at the floor, looked up. She knew the answer, but Evelyn froze. Her eyes darted to the side, searching her memory banks, scrolling through years of conversations she had tuned out because they were not about her or Jasmine. "Well," Evelyn laughed nervously. "It was one of those big ones up north. The Ivy League. It was Yale." "No, wait. Columbia." I stared at her. "I went to Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania, mother. I graduated summa cum laude. You came to the graduation. You sat in the front row. You took pictures. And you do not remember the name of the school." Evelyn waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, details. Wharton, Yale. It is all the same. It means you are smart. That is what matters. Why are you testing me?" "This is childish. It is not a test," I said softly. "It is a baseline. Let's try another one. What is my job title, not just business? What do I actually do for a living?" Evelyn shifted in her chair, the leather creaking beneath her. You manage things. You own companies. You are an investor. Sophia, what does this have to do with the eviction?" "I am a risk assessment actuary and a logistics consultant for the pharmaceutical industry," I recited. "I have explained this to you at every Thanksgiving dinner for 10 years. You usually interrupt me to talk about Jasmine's latest pageant or Kyle's latest scheme." Jasmine let out a small, choked sound, but she did not speak. She knew I was right. Evelyn's smile was faltering now. Her eyes were hardening. "Fine. So I am not good with technical terms. I am your mother, not your secretary. I cared about your happiness, not your resume. That is why I brought the cake. To show you I care about what makes you happy. Go on, try a slice. It is fresh." I looked at the cake again. I looked at the green nuts specifically. "Pistachios. You made this for me?" I asked. "Because it is my favorite." "Yes." Evelyn nodded vigorously. "You always loved it." I stood up slowly. I walked around the desk and stood right in front of her. She looked up at me, expecting gratitude. "Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I am allergic to pistachios. Evelyn's face went blank. No, you are not. Do not be ridiculous. I went into anaphylactic shock when I was 10 years old. I continued the memory playing in my head like a horror movie. We were at the park. I ate pistachio ice cream. My throat closed up. I turned blue. The ambulance came. You were not there because you were taking Jasmine to a ballet recital. Dad rode with me in the ambulance. He held my hand while they injected me with epinephrine. I spent 2 days in the hospital. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I do not remember that. Of course you don't, I said. And for the first time I felt the final tether snap. The invisible cord that had bound me to her, the cord that pulsed with the desperate need for her approval, the cord that made me buy her houses and pay her bills, it just disintegrated. You do not remember, because you were never really looking at me, I said. You saw me as an extension of yourself, or as a resource, but never as a person. You do not know where I went to school. You do not know what I do, and you do not know what kills me. You brought a loaded gun into my office and called it a peace offering. I turned away from her and walked back to the window looking out at the city. The grief I expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, there was a vast, cool emptiness. It was the feeling of a heavy debt finally being written off. Sophia Evelyn stammered, standing up. You are being dramatic. It was a mistake. I forgot. It was 20 years ago. People forget things. People forget keys, Mother, I said without turning around. Mothers do not forget that their child almost died. I heard Jasmine sobbing quietly in the chair. She remembered. I could tell by the way she was shrinking into herself. She remembered the ambulance. She remembered Dad crying. I turned back to face them. The meeting is over. But the money, Evelyn cried, panic finally breaking through her mask. Sophia, please. We have nowhere to go. We are hungry. The house is freezing. You cannot do this to us. I picked up the phone on my desk and pressed a button. Sarah, please have security escort Mrs. Brooks and her daughter out of the building, and send a cleaning crew to my office to dispose of a biohazard on my desk. Biohazard? Evelyn screeched. It is a cake. It is poison, I corrected her. Just like this relationship. The door opened and David, my large security guard, stepped in. His presence filled the room. He looked at Evelyn and Jasmine with a professional detachment that mirrored my own. Ladies, he said, gesturing to the door. Evelyn looked at me one last time. Her eyes were full of venom now. You are cold, Sophia. You are ice cold. You will die alone in this tower. Better to be alone in a tower than to be suffocated in a basement, I replied. Jasmine stood up. She looked at me and for a second our eyes met. I saw the apology she was too weak to speak. I saw the realization that she had bet on the wrong horse her entire life. But it was too late. She had signed the papers. She had spent the money. She had chosen her side. I watched them walk out. Evelyn was still clutching her fur coat, muttering about ungrateful children. Jasmine trailed behind her, a broken shadow. When the door clicked shut, the silence returned. It was perfect. It was pure. I looked at the cake sitting on my desk. A beautiful, deadly thing. I did not feel sad. I did not feel angry. I felt like a surgeon who had just successfully removed a gangrenous limb. The operation was painful, but the patient would survive. I picked up the Tupperware container and dropped it into the trash can. It landed with a heavy thud. Go home, Mother, I whispered to the empty room. Tomorrow is the deadline, and I am never looking back. While my mother and sister were being escorted out of my building by security, Kyle was standing in line at the international terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, trying to look invisible. He was wearing a hat pulled low over his eyes and sunglasses that drew more attention than they deflected. In his pocket was a one-way ticket to a country with non-existent extradition laws, and a passport that looked real, but belonged to a man who did not exist. He was sweating despite the air conditioning. His leg was bouncing nervously as the line for security inched forward. He checked his watch every 30 seconds. He had drained the crypto wallet, stolen Jasmine's jewelry, and taken the cash from the predatory loan. He had about $40,000 in liquid assets on him, enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere where nobody knew he was a fraud who had failed at everything he touched. He reached the Transportation Security Administration checkpoint. The agent, a stern woman who looked like she had seen every trick in the book, beckoned him forward. Kyle handed over the passport. The name on it was Robert Vance. It was a sloppy alias using my father's first name and my lawyer's last name, a subconscious slip that revealed just how obsessed he was with the people he hated. The agent scanned the passport. She looked at the screen, then she looked at Kyle. Then she looked at the screen again. A small red light blinked silently on her console. Kyle's heart hammered against his ribs. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I am in a hurry. My flight leaves in 40 minutes. The agent did not answer. She picked up her radio. "Supervisor to lane 4, she said calmly. Kyle panic spiked. He reached for the passport. "Just give it back," he said. "I changed my mind. I am not flying today." "Sir, please leave your hands where I can see them," the agent said, her hand moving to her hip. Suddenly, two men in dark suits appeared from behind the partition. They were not airport security. They wore jackets with bold yellow letters on the back, FBI. They moved with the efficiency of predators closing in on wounded prey. Kyle turned to run, but a third agent blocked his path from behind. "Kyle Brooks," the lead agent said, holding up a badge. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and flight to avoid prosecution." "I am not Kyle Brooks," Kyle stammered, backing away until he bumped into the X-ray machine. "My name is Robert. Look at the passport." "We know about the passport," the agent said, snapping a pair of handcuffs onto Kyle's wrists. "We also know about the social security number you stole from your wife 2 days ago. And we know about the loan application you falsified. Your sister-in-law, Sophia Brooks, filed a very detailed report with the Bureau regarding the theft of her sister's identity. She flagged you as a flight risk." The mention of my name seemed to break him. Kyle began to scream. He screamed that he was innocent. He screamed that I was setting him up. He screamed that he was a businessman. People in the terminal pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle. The man who wanted to be famous, who wanted to be an influencer and a tycoon, finally got his wish. He was going viral. But instead of admiration, the world was watching him being dragged away in handcuffs, his fake passport lying on the floor like a piece of trash. 12 hours later, the sun rose over the Brooks estate for the last time. It was the deadline. The 30 days were up. But because of the volatile situation and the damage I had witnessed during my inspection, my lawyers had petitioned for an emergency enforcement of the eviction order. The judge, seeing the evidence of the illegal grow operation and the stripping of assets, had signed it immediately. I arrived at 8 in the morning. This time I did not come alone, and I did not come to talk. I pulled up in my car and parked across the street. Behind me was a convoy that looked like a military operation. There were 2 sheriff's department cruisers, a locksmith van, and a large box truck from a professional eviction service. The deputies walked up the driveway first. They banged on the door. "Sheriff's Department," they shouted. "Execution of eviction order. Open the door." There was no answer. The deputies used a battering ram to breach the lock that Kyle had illegally changed. The wood splintered with a loud crack that echoed through the neighborhood. They swarmed inside to clear the house, ensuring there were no threats. A few minutes later, the lead deputy waved me over. "The house is secure, Ms. Brooks. You can enter." I walked inside. The house was freezing, the air stagnant and heavy. Evelyn and Jasmine were sitting at the kitchen table wearing their coats. They looked up as I entered. Evelyn's eyes were red and swollen. Jasmine looked catatonic, staring at nothing. "What is happening?" Evelyn whispered. "Why are there police?" "It is over, Mother," I said, standing in the doorway. "The deadline has passed. You have 10 minutes to gather your personal effects. The movers are here to clear the rest." "But we have furniture," Evelyn cried, standing up. "My china cabinet, the piano, the antique rug in the foyer." I shook my head. The furniture belongs to the house. The piano was purchased by the trust. The rug is listed in the inventory of the holding company. You are authorized to remove clothing, toiletries, and personal documents. Everything else stays. This is robbery! Evelyn shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. You are robbing your own mother. Officer, arrest her. She is stealing my home. The deputy stepped forward, his face impassive. Ma'am, the paperwork is in order. The property and its contents belong to SP Holdings. You have been given ample notice. You need to start packing your clothes now, or the movers will do it for you. And trust me, you do not want them to do it. Jasmine stood up slowly. Where is Kyle? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He said he would fix this. He said he was coming back. I looked at her. I almost felt pity, but then I remembered the pistachio cake. I remembered the years of mockery. Kyle is in federal custody, I said simply. He was arrested at the airport last night trying to flee the country with a fake passport. He used your identity to steal $10,000, Jasmine. He wasn't coming back to save you. He was running away from you. Jasmine let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was the sound of a mind finally snapping under the weight of truth. She did not argue. She did not scream. She simply walked past me, heading up the stairs like a zombie. Evelyn, however, was not going down without a fight. She grabbed a silver candelabra from the sideboard. This is mine, she hissed, clutching it to her chest. It has been in the family for 50 years. Put it down, Mother, I said. Make me, she spat. The deputy stepped in. Ma'am, if you attempt to remove property that is under dispute or listed in the eviction order, I will have to charge you with theft. Put the item down. Evelyn looked at the deputy, then at me. She saw the resolve in my eyes. She saw that I wasn't the daughter who sought her approval anymore. I was the executioner of her consequences. Her hands shook. She dropped the heavy silver candlestick. It hit the floor with a dull thud, denting the hardwood. Fine, she screamed. Take it all. I do not want anything from you. You are cursed, Sophia. You are a devil. I motioned to the movers. Start clearing the rooms. The crew moved in with ruthless efficiency. They carried large black plastic trash bags. They did not bring boxes. Boxes are for people who move voluntarily. Bags are for people who are evicted. They went room to room, opening drawers and dumping clothes into the bags. The sound of silk and cashmere rustling against the plastic was the soundtrack of their demise. Evelyn tried to supervise them, yelling at them to be careful with her furs, but they ignored her. They were paid to be fast, not gentle. Within 20 minutes, 10 large black bags were piled in the foyer. That is everything the foreman said. I looked at the pile. It looked like garbage waiting for pickup. And in a way it was. Take them out, I said. Evelyn and Jasmine were escorted out the front door. They stood on the driveway, the cold wind whipping their hair. The movers carried the black bags out and dropped them at their feet. There was no moving truck waiting for them. There was no luxury car, just a pile of plastic bags on the concrete. You cannot leave us here, Evelyn pleaded, her defiance finally crumbling into terror. We have no car. How do we leave? I pointed to the end of the driveway. I called you an Uber, Mother. It is a basic sedan. It will take you to the extended stay motel on the outskirts of town. I have paid for 1 week. After that, you are on your own. An Uber. Evelyn gasped. You expect me to get into a stranger's car with my life in trash bags? I expect you to do whatever you need to do to survive, I said. Just like I had to do when you let me drown in this family. The Uber pulled up. It was a dented Toyota Camry. The driver looked confused by the police presence and the pile of bags. I turned my back on them and walked back into the house. I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. I walked out onto the balcony that overlooked the driveway. I stood there gripping the cold iron railing. I watched as the deputy helped Jasmine load the bags into the trunk. Jasmine looked broken, her movements slow and mechanical. Evelyn was arguing with the driver, probably telling him he wasn't fit to drive her, but eventually she got in the back seat. The car door slammed shut. The sound echoed in the crisp morning air. The car pulled away, driving slowly down the long, winding driveway that had been the pride of the Brooks family for decades. I watched the taillights get smaller and smaller until they turned onto the main road and disappeared. I waited for the tears. I waited for the guilt. I waited for the crushing sense of loss that usually comes when a family breaks apart. But none of it came. My pulse was steady. My breathing was deep and even. I looked out at the dormant lawn, at the empty driveway, and at the horizon where the sun was climbing higher. I felt clean. I felt light. It was as if a tumor had been cut out of my life, and for the first time the wound was closed. I turned around and looked back into the empty bedroom. The silence was not lonely. It was peaceful. I took my phone out of my pocket and dialed a number. "Hello, Marcus," I said when my lawyer answered. "It is done. They are gone. You can list the house for sale tomorrow. I want it gone. I want every trace of them erased." I hung up and walked back inside, closing the balcony doors behind me, locking out the cold and locking out the past forever. The house was finally mine, just in time for me to sell it and move on. 30 days after the eviction trucks pulled away from the driveway, the last vestige of the Brooks family legacy was erased from the map. The sale of the house closed on a Tuesday afternoon. I did not attend the closing in person. I signed the documents digitally from my office while sipping a latte. The wire transfer hit my account an hour later. It was a staggering number, the kind of number that would have secured Evelyn's status at her country club for another decade. But the money did not go into my personal savings, and it certainly did not go to the women who were currently living in a two-room efficiency motel on the edge of town. Instead, I initiated a second wire transfer immediately. The entire proceeds from the sale of the house, every single cent of equity, was deposited into a newly formed trust, the Robert Brooks Memorial Scholarship Fund. It was designed specifically for first-generation college students who needed financial independence to escape toxic home environments. It was the ultimate irony. The house that had been a prison of expectations for me would now become the key to freedom for hundreds of others. I could feel my father smiling down on me. He had been a weak man in life, unable to stand up to Evelyn's demands. But in death and through my actions, he was finally doing something good. I drove past the house one last time before the new owners moved in. The for sale sign was gone. The overgrown lawn had already been mowed. The windows were dark. I looked at the window of my old bedroom and felt nothing. No nostalgia, no pain. It was just a structure of brick and wood. The ghosts were gone because I had stopped feeding them. Across town, in a neighborhood that Evelyn would have previously refused to drive through, let alone live in, the reality of the New World Order was setting in. The extended stay, America on Route 41, was not the Ritz. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing, and the carpet smelled permanently of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. Evelyn sat on the edge of the double bed folding laundry from the coin-operated machine down the hall. Her manicured nails were chipped. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun because she could no longer afford the weekly blowouts that had defined her existence. She looked at the clock. It was almost 6. Jasmine would be coming home soon. Jasmine, who had once spent her days shopping and curating her Instagram feed, was now working the evening shift at a 24-hour diner 3 miles away. She was a hostess, a job that required her to stand on her feet for 8 hours and smile at strangers who didn't care about her last name. When the door opened, Jasmine walked in looking exhausted. Her uniform smelled of grease and coffee. She dropped her bag on the floor and collapsed onto the other bed. "How was it?" Evelyn asked, her voice lacking its usual bite. "My feet are bleeding," Jasmine murmured, closing her eyes. "A customer yelled at me because his eggs were cold. I wanted to tell him that I used to wear Louboutins. I wanted to tell him who I was. But then I realized I am nobody. I am just the girl who seats people." Evelyn sighed, picking up a shirt. "We have to keep going, Jasmine. We just need to save enough for a deposit on an apartment. Once we get settled, we can reach out to some of your father's old friends. Someone will help us." Jasmine laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Mom, nobody is going to help us. I saw Mrs. Higgins at the diner today. She saw me too. She looked right at me, and then she looked away. She requested a booth in the back so she wouldn't have to talk to me. We are pariahs. Sophia won. Sophia did not win. Evelyn snapped, though the fire in her eyes was dim. She abandoned us. There is a difference. She will regret it one day. When she is old and alone, she will realize that money cannot buy family. But as Evelyn said the words, she looked around the cramped beige room. She looked at the mini fridge that hummed loudly in the corner. She looked at her daughter, who was aged beyond her years by stress and poverty. And deep down in a place she would never acknowledge, she knew the truth. Sophia wasn't the one who was alone. They were. New Year's Eve arrived with a crisp, clear sky over Atlanta. In my penthouse, the atmosphere was the polar opposite of the suffocating tension that had defined my holidays for the past decade. There were no arguments. There was no passive-aggressive commentary about my weight or my career. There was only jazz music playing softly from the speakers and the hum of conversation from people who actually liked each other. I had invited a small group, my chosen family. There was Marcus, my lawyer, who had stood by me when I was shaking with fear holding that eviction notice. There was Sarah, my assistant, who knew my coffee order and my traumas better than my own sister. There was Julian, the venture capitalist I had met in Aspen, who had flown in just for the evening. And there were a few friends from college who had known me before I had money, people who loved me when I was broke and studying by flashlight in the library. We stood on the terrace overlooking the city. The wind was cold, but the outdoor heaters and the warmth of the company made it bearable. We were drinking champagne not to show off, but to celebrate survival. Julian leaned against the railing next to me. "You look different tonight, Sophia." "Different how?" I asked, smiling. "Lighter," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "You look like someone who put down a heavy backpack they didn't know they were carrying." I looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there in the vast grid of Atlanta, my mother and sister were probably watching the countdown on a small television in a motel room. I wondered briefly if they were thinking of me. Probably. They were probably cursing my name. But for the first time, their anger did not reach me. It was like a radio frequency I had tuned out. "I am lighter," I admitted. "I spent 34 years trying to buy peace. I thought if I paid enough bills, if I solved enough problems, they would finally let me rest. But peace isn't something you buy, Sophia. It is something you build, and you have to clear the land before you can build the foundation." Marcus walked over, joining us. "To the new year," he said, raising his glass. "And to SP Holdings. The scholarship fund received its first 50 applications today." I read a few. "There is a girl from Chicago who wants to study architecture. Her story reminds me of yours." I felt a lump in my throat. A good lump. "That is what it is all about," I said. "Breaking the cycle. If I can help one girl escape the guilt and the obligation, then everything I went through was worth it." The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. I looked around the circle of faces. These people did not share my DNA. They did not owe me anything. And yet here they were, showing up for me, not because I paid them, but because they valued me. That was the revelation. Family isn't blood. Blood is just biology. Family is loyalty. Family is respect. Family is the people who hand you a glass of water when you are thirsty, not the ones who demand you drain the ocean for them. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. The shouts echoed across the rooftops. Fireworks exploded in the distance, painting the sky in bursts of red and gold. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cold, clean air of January. A new year. A new life. A new me. As the cheers died down and the music swelled back up, my phone vibrated in the pocket of my silk dress. I pulled it out instinctively. The screen lit up with an incoming call. The number was unknown, a local area code, but I knew. My intuition, sharpened by years of navigating their minefields, told me exactly who it was. It was midnight, the time when defenses are low and nostalgia hits hard. Evelyn was calling, maybe to scream, maybe to cry, Maybe to try one last manipulation tactic to guilt me into sending a wire transfer for the new year. I stared at the screen. The old Sophia would have answered. The old Sophia would have felt the pull of obligation. The old Sophia would have argued, defended, explained, and ultimately suffered. But the Sophia standing on this balcony was a stranger to that old life. I looked at the vibrating phone as if it were an artifact from a museum, a relic of a civilization that had collapsed. I did not feel anger. I did not feel hate. I felt indifference. And that I realized was the true opposite of love. Not hate, but indifference. I swiped my thumb across the screen. I did not slide to answer. I pressed the side button, silencing the call. Then I tapped the small eye icon next to the number. I scrolled down to the bottom of the menu. The text was red. Block caller. I pressed it. A confirmation box popped up. You will not receive phone calls, messages, or FaceTime from people on the block list. I tapped block contact. The phone went still. The connection was severed, not just electronically, but spiritually. I looked up at Julian, who was watching me with a knowing smile. Everything okay? He asked. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. It is better than okay, I said. It is finished. I raised my glass of champagne toward the skyline, toward the future, and toward the woman I had fought so hard to become. To freedom, I whispered. To freedom, my friends echoed. I took a sip. The bubbles were crisp and cold. The city lights blurred into a tapestry of hope. I was Sophia Brooks. I was 34 years old. I was alone in terms of blood, but I was surrounded by love. And for the first time in my entire life, I was truly, completely, beautifully free. The story of my family had ended. The story of my life was just beginning. Sophia's journey teaches us that family is defined by behavior, not biology. For years, she tried to purchase love with generosity, only to realize she was merely financing her own abuse. The ultimate act of self-love wasn't just cutting the financial lifeline, but severing the emotional tether to people who viewed her solely as a resource. Her story is a powerful reminder that we cannot heal in the same environment that broke us. True peace arrives only when we stop apologizing for our success and start building a chosen family based on mutual respect, loyalty, and genuine connection. Have you ever had to choose between your mental peace and your family's expectations? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power.